Economy is to the right, sweetheart. Diana Wolf didn't whisper it. She didn't lean in close to keep it private. She said it the way someone reads a sign flat, certain final, as if the answer had already been decided long before the question was asked. Her eyes moved over the young woman standing at the aircraft door the way a customs officer scans a flagged passport. Up, down. A flicker of conclusion. The girl was young, early 20s at most. Dark skin, natural hair pulled into two loose twists that fell past her ears, and an oversized cream-colored sweatshirt that made her look, in Diana's expert estimation, entirely out of place. She carried a leather weekend bag that hung from one shoulder, and she was looking to the left toward first class, with the quiet confidence of someone who had been there before. That confidence was the thing that irritated Diana most. She had been a senior purser for Atlantic Premier Airlines for 22 years. She knew first-class passengers. She knew the way they dressed, the way they moved, the particular ease that came with old money and business-class upgrades and a lifetime of being treated well. And this girl, this young, unbothered, hooded girl standing in the threshold of her aircraft, did not fit the profile. Diana smiled. It was the kind of smile that looked warm from a distance and felt like glass up close. Economy is to the right, sweetheart. She said it as though she were doing the girl a favor, as though pointing her in the wrong direction was an act of kindness rather than an assumption wrapped in 22 years of unchecked authority. What Diana Wolf did not know, could not have known standing there in her perfectly pressed uniform with her platinum blonde chignon and her absolute certainty, was that the girl she had just redirected was Imani Carter. 22 years old, quiet, composed, and entirely uninterested in proving anything to anyone. She didn't need to, because somewhere on the other side of that terminal, a matte black Gulfstream G700 sat fueled and waiting on the private apron, and the man sitting inside it had built the leasing empire that provided Atlantic Premier Airlines with 31 of the very jets they flew. But we'll get to that. Before we do, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing this community from every corner of the world, and if you believe that every single passenger deserves basic human dignity, regardless of what they're wearing, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Now, let's go back to the moment everything began to unravel. John F. Kennedy International Airport on a Thursday evening is its own kind of controlled chaos. Terminal 4 hums with the particular energy of a place that never truly sleeps. The distant drone of jet engines, the staccato click of rolling suitcases across polished floors, the tinny echo of gate announcements competing with each other in 4 languages. At Gate C-19, Atlantic Premier Flight 407 to London Heathrow had begun its priority boarding sequence. The gate agent, a young man named Devon, with a patient smile, scanned passes with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Outside the wall of glass behind him, the evening sky had gone the color of a bruise, deep purple bleeding into charcoal gray, and the first threads of rain were beginning to streak the windows. Imani Carter arrived at the priority lane 3 minutes before her boarding group was called. She had been in New York for 4 days, visiting a college friend, and now she was heading to London to meet her father, who had flown commercial on business 2 days ahead of her, a detail that would matter later. She looked exactly like what she was, a young woman comfortable enough in herself to have stopped trying to perform wealth for other people's benefit. The sweatshirt was cream-colored French terry, the kind of fabric that costs more per yard than most people spend on a full outfit. Her leather bag was handmade. The small gold hoops in her ears had been a birthday gift from her father, plain enough to go unnoticed and expensive enough to last forever. She held her phone loosely in one hand, the screen displaying a digital boarding pass with a clean gold banner across the top. Zone 1, First Class, Seat 2A. Devon scanned it. The reader chimed green. "Enjoy your flight." "Ms. Carter," he said. She thanked him and walked down the jet bridge. Diana Wolf had been a flight attendant since the year Imani Carter was born. She had started at 26, young, eager, genuinely passionate about service, and over 2 decades had calcified into something else entirely. 22 years in the air had given her an encyclopedic knowledge of every aircraft in the Atlantic Premier Fleet, an instinctive command of high-pressure cabin situations, and an arrogance so deeply embedded she had long since stopped recognizing it as arrogance. She called it standards. She had a reputation among the cabin crew as someone who ran an immaculate first-class service, the kind of service where champagne appeared before passengers asked where dietary restrictions were memorized rather than checked, where the ambient temperature was adjusted by feel rather than by the dial. Her colleagues respected her the way people respect a strict but effective general at a careful distance. What they did not say out loud but understood between themselves was that Diana had a type, a passenger type she considered first-class material. It wasn't written anywhere, wasn't taught in any training manual, wasn't something she could have articulated if pressed. It was visceral, instinctive, the product of 22 years of sorting people into categories and trusting her own judgment above the evidence in front of her. Her uniform was always impeccable. Navy jacket nipped at the waist, slim trousers with a sharp crease, a silk scarf knotted just so at the collar. Her platinum blonde hair was pinned into a smooth chignon at the nape of her neck without a single strand out of place. She wore a single strand of pearls, real ones, and her lipstick was always the precise shade of burgundy red that she had worn every single working day for 11 years. When she stood at the aircraft door to greet boarding passengers, she did so with the proprietary authority of someone who owned the space. Tonight, as the priority lane passengers began flowing down the jet bridge, Diana was at her post. She greeted a retired senator she recognized with both hands. She welcomed a tech executive with a warm, professional smile. She nodded to a couple in matching cashmere travel sets with appropriate deference. And then Imani Carter stepped over the threshold. Diana's smile stayed in place, but her eyes moved, and a decision was made in the time it takes to blink. Economy is to the right, sweetheart. Imani stopped. She turned back to the flight attendant slowly with the unhurried patience of someone who had heard this before, and had long since decided that patience was a more powerful weapon than anger. "My seat is 2A," Imani said. Her voice was even. Not loud, not sharp. Just clean, the kind of tone that doesn't leave room for misunderstanding. Diana's smile tightened by a fraction. There must be some confusion. First class is reserved for our premium cabin guests. "I am a premium cabin guest," Imani said. She lifted her phone and turned the screen toward Diana so the boarding pass was clearly visible. The name, the seat, the golden Zone 1 banner. Diana looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back at Imani. "Anyone can take a screenshot," she said lightly. "And unfortunately, we have had issues recently with system errors generating duplicate passes. I'll need to verify this on our tablet before I can allow you through." She said it with the smooth authority of someone announcing a policy rather than inventing an obstacle. Behind Imani, 2 other passengers had stopped on the jet bridge, sensing the delay. Imani held her ground. "It's not a screenshot. It's the live app. You can scan the barcode. I will need to see physical identification as well," Diana said, as though Imani hadn't spoken. Imani reached into her bag and produced her passport without expression. She handed it over. Diana took it between 2 fingers. Her eyes moved between the document and the girl in front of her with a look that managed to communicate profound skepticism without ever using a single impolite word. She produced her airline-issued tablet from the galley counter and scanned the barcode on Imani's phone. The tablet chimed. The screen turned green. Carter. Imani. Seat 2A. Status confirmed. Full fare. Diana stared at the screen for 3 full seconds. Then she looked up, and even now faced with irrefutable confirmation, Something in her refused to accept it. There are occasions, she said carefully, where the system confirms a booking that was processed in error. I'd like to make a quick call to the gate to verify the original ticket. That is my seat, Imani said. The tablet confirmed it. I'm going to sit down now. She moved toward the first-class cabin. Diana stepped in front of her. Not so fast, Diana said. Her voice had dropped below the sweet register now. She was still smiling, but the smile had become something cold and architectural, a structure designed to hold authority in place. I determine cabin access on this aircraft. You will wait here until I've made my verification call, or I will ask you to step back onto the jet bridge. The two passengers behind Imani on the jet bridge had gone very still. Imani looked at Diana directly. You already verified it, she said. The tablet is green. The name matches my passport. What exactly are you calling to verify? Diana didn't answer. She turned, picked up the galley phone, and dialed the gate. As she waited, she glanced back at Imani once, a single assessing look, and then away. From the jet bridge doorway, Trevor Nash, Diana's junior colleague, appeared. He'd been listening. He glanced at the tablet still sitting open on the counter, looked at Imani, and then looked at Diana with an expression that was not disagreement. It's fine, Diana said into the phone without preamble. We have a passenger at the door whose booking I'm verifying. Just hold the manifest open for me. She hung up. Then she turned back to Imani. There's going to be a brief wait, she said. If you'd like to step to the side. I'm not stepping to the side, Imani said. I have a valid ticket for seat 2A on this aircraft. I have been verified. I am going to sit in my seat. For the first time, something genuine flickered behind Diana's controlled expression. Not quite anger. Something colder. She glanced past Imani toward the jet bridge, and then Arthur Caldwell walked through the door. Arthur Caldwell was 58 years old, silver-haired, and dressed in a charcoal wool suit that had probably cost what a gate agent earned in a month. He was slightly out of breath, the particular breathlessness of a man unaccustomed to rushing, and he was dabbing the back of his neck with a folded handkerchief. Diana's entire manner changed in an instant. Her shoulders dropped a quarter inch. The architectural smile became something warmer. Mr. Caldwell, welcome back. We almost thought we'd lost you tonight. Caldwell exhaled and smiled. Security line was an absolute travesty, Diana. I barely made it. He looked past her at the first-class cabin with visible relief. I need a drink and 12 hours of sleep before I even think about the merger documents in my bag. Diana tilted her head. Her eyes moved briefly to Imani, then back to Caldwell with an expression Imani would later describe as the moment a decision became a plan. Mr. Caldwell, she said smoothly, I believe we may be able to accommodate you more comfortably tonight. We have an opening in 2A. Let me just process a quick upgrade. Imani went still. Every single word she had just heard registered with the precision of a recording. Excuse me, Imani said. Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. The soft consonants became edges. Seat 2. A is mine. That is not an opening. That is my confirmed, paid, verified seat. Caldwell looked at her for the first time, vaguely uncomfortable, clearly hoping someone else would handle it. Diana turned to Imani with an expression of patient finality. I've just spoken with the gate Ms. Carter, and there is a discrepancy in the original booking record that overrides the system confirmation. Your original ticket was issued for economy. The first-class pass was generated in error. You will need to move to the back. That is a lie, Imani said. She said it clearly, not loud, not hysterical. The word landed like a stone on a still surface. I watched you scan my ticket, she continued. You watched it go green. There is no discrepancy. You are giving my seat to this man because you have decided, based on nothing you will say out loud, that I don't look like I belong here." Diana leaned in close. Her perfume was expensive floral and somehow threatening. "Young lady," she said quietly, "I am the senior purser on this aircraft. I have authority over this cabin. If you continue to argue with me, I will call airport security and have you removed from the flight entirely. You will not be going to London tonight. Are we clear?" She straightened, adjusted her pearl strand, smiled at Caldwell. "To a Mr. Caldwell. Right this way." The walk down that aisle was the longest Imani had taken in years. She didn't cry. She had promised herself at 16, after the third time, a luxury boutique security guard had materialized from nowhere to follow her through a store. Her father's company held equity in that she would not give situations like this the gift of her tears. Tears were for private rooms and trusted company, not for cabins full of strangers watching her be diminished in real time. So she walked. She passed through the first-class section with its wide leather seats and ambient blue lighting and the crystalline clink of champagne being poured. She passed through the premium economy cabin where a few passengers glanced up from their tablets and then quickly looked away. She pushed through the curtain into main cabin where the air changed thinner, more crowded, laced with the faint chemical smell of industrial cleaner. Trevor Nash walked 2 steps ahead of her, ostensibly to help. He pointed at row 47 without making eye contact. "Seat E," he said. "Middle." Imani looked at row 47. The man on the aisle was asleep before the plane had even pushed back his shoulder, already encroaching into the adjacent space. The window seat held a young woman with 2 carry-ons crammed under the seat, leaving no footroom for anyone beside her. Seat 47E was a perfect, complete, deliberate indignity. Imani sat down. She wedged her leather bag between her feet. She straightened her posture and put her noise-canceling headphones around her neck, not over her ears. Not yet. She wanted to hear. A woman across the aisle, early 40s, warm brown skin, dark hair, glanced at Imani with an expression that recognized exactly what had just happened. Their eyes met. Rosa Medina said nothing, but she nodded, just barely. The nod of someone who understood and was choosing their moment. Imani pulled out her phone. Her hands were steady. That had required effort. She opened her messages. She typed, "Dad. I'm on the plane. I'm in row 47. The 3 typing dots appeared almost before Imani finished sending. Marcus Carter read fast and responded faster. Row 47. I thought you booked 2A. Imani typed back, "I did." The senior purser stopped me at the door. Said the ticket was a system error. Verified it herself with the tablet, it was green, and then gave my seat to a white man in a suit who boarded after me. Threatened to call security if I argued. The dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. What airline? Atlantic Premier. Flight 407. Flight attendant name. Diana. Senior purser. Platinum blonde. She had pearls on. 15 seconds passed. Imani counted them. "Put your seatbelt on, baby girl." Imani frowned at the screen. "Why?" "Because this flight isn't going to London yet. I need one more piece of information. Do you see the aircraft tail number on the wing from your window?" Imani pressed her face toward the oval window. The lights on the wing were still lit from the gate. She could make out the lettering on the fuselage. N83CG, she typed. Another pause. Shorter this time. "That's one of ours. Put your headphones on. Don't say anything to anyone. Just wait." Imani sat back. She looked at the message for a moment. Then she slowly put her headphones on, not over her ears, but around her neck like a collar. A quiet signal to anyone watching that she was still listening. Across the aisle, Rosa Medina had her phone out. She was watching the window. In seat 29B, Jake Torres, a travel journalist who had been documenting his trip for the last 48 hours, had his camera rolling for what he assumed would be standard boarding footage. He had watched the entire exchange at the front of the aircraft from his position in premium economy with growing discomfort. He had 17,000 followers on his platform. He pressed record and kept it running. Up in first class, Diana Wolf moved through the cabin like a woman who had just restored order to a disordered universe. She carried the silver tray with the pre-departure beverage selection champagne orange juice or sparkling water with the practiced elegance of someone who had done it 20,000 times and still found satisfaction in the ritual. The ambient lighting made her pearls glow softly. The burgundy lipstick was still perfect. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, leaning over seat 2A with a warm, practiced tilt. "Laurent Perrier tonight." Caldwell barely looked up from his phone. "Wonderful. Thank you, Diana." She poured. She smiled. She moved on. The natural order of things, she thought, had been restored. The girl had been redirected. The seat was occupied by someone appropriate. The cabin was quiet and composed and exactly as it should be. Diana did not allow herself to think about the green confirmation on her tablet. She did not allow herself to replay the look on the young woman's face when she had been sent to row 47. Those details were filed away in the part of her brain that she had trained over 22 years to simply not examine too closely. Trevor Nash appeared at her elbow. He was carrying a water pitcher. "Everything okay with the manifest situation?" he asked, his voice pitched low. "Everything is handled," Diana said without looking at him. She topped up the champagne in 1C and moved to the galley to prepare the warm towel service. At the forward door, the boarding agent gave the all-clear sign. The jet bridge retracted. Diana armed her station, secured the galley latches, and settled into her jump seat to prepare for taxi. She pulled the harness straps across her chest and clicked them into place with the satisfaction of a woman at the top of her domain. Outside, the engines whined to life. Imani sat in 47E and let herself go somewhere else for a moment. The headphones were around her neck, and the engine noise rose in a slow crescendo beneath her, and she closed her eyes and let the memory come. She was 8 years old. Her father had taken her on her first commercial flight, not the private jet which they rarely used for short hops in those years when Carter Global Aviation was still building itself up from the ground, but a real commercial plane. Coach. 3 seats across. Houston to Atlanta, one of the early routes Marcus had been negotiating a lease agreement with for a mid-sized carrier that no longer existed. He had explained this to her during the drive to the airport, that he needed to fly coach on this particular carrier to understand their operations from the passenger perspective. That was how he always talked to her, like she was an adult who deserved the actual reason, not a child who needed a simplified version. She had been thrilled. She had a window seat which her father had specifically requested, and a juice box and a book about migratory birds that she carried everywhere that year. The flight attendant working their section of the aircraft had a kind face and tired eyes. She had smiled at Imani when they boarded and offered her a small pack of pretzels before the cart even made its official run. A man 3 rows ahead had snapped his fingers at the flight attendant, actually snapped his fingers and spoken to her in a voice that made Imani's stomach feel wrong the way touching something unexpectedly cold feels wrong. The flight attendant had responded with patience that even at 8, Imani understood was costing something. On the descent into Atlanta, Imani had leaned over to her father. "That man was mean to her," she said. Marcus had looked at her. "Yes," he said. "He was." "Why do people do that?" Marcus had been quiet for a long time, long enough that Imani assumed the conversation was over. Then he said, "Because somewhere along the way someone taught them that other people's dignity is optional, that you can decide based on how someone looks or what they're wearing or what job they're doing whether they deserve your respect. But that's wrong," Imani had said. "Yes," Marcus said, "it is. And the best answer I know to that is to build something. Build something big enough and real enough and lasting enough that the people who want to treat others as optional eventually have to reckon with the fact that they are not the ones in charge. She had thought about that for years. She still thought about it. 14 years later, sitting in 47E on a plane that her father's company had leased to this airline, being sent to the back by a woman in pearls who had looked at her and decided she was optional. Imani thought about it again. She also thought about the summer she was 12, when her father had taken her to meet one of his oldest mentors, a man named Raymond, who had built a trucking business from a single second-hand vehicle into a regional fleet. Raymond had been in his 70s then, sharp-eyed and slow-moving, and he had taken Imani's hands in both of his and said, "Your father is teaching you something that most people spend a lifetime unlearning, that your presence is never an imposition. It is never a mistake. It is never something that requires another person's permission. You belong in every room you walk into," Raymond had told her. "And don't you ever let someone else's blindness make you believe otherwise." She had nodded. She had been 12. She had not yet understood how many times she would need to remember that. She understood it more every year. The plane lurched slightly as it began to roll back from the gate. The engines settled into their departure tone. Imani opened her eyes, looked out at the small oval window at the dark rain-streaked runway lights of JFK, and breathed. Her father had told her to wait. She would wait. But she already knew what was coming. Not the specific shape of it. She couldn't have predicted. The Gulfstream couldn't have drawn the map of consequences that would unfold in the next 40 minutes. But she knew her father. She knew what it meant when his texts went from warm and easy to forward sentences and precise requests for information. It meant he was already moving. And Marcus Carter, when he was already moving, was not a man who stopped until the situation was resolved. Imani adjusted her headphones, settled her bag between her feet, and thought Diana Wolf has about 15 minutes of believing she won. Then she pulled out her book and opened it to page 1. She would not be reading it. But the act of opening it, of sitting in the worst seat on a plane that her family helped put into the air and appearing entirely unbothered, was itself a kind of power. She recognized it as something her father had taught her without ever naming it, the power of refusing to perform your own humiliation for an audience that is waiting for it. Plane pushes back 400 words. "Ladies and gentlemen from the flight deck," Captain Warren Holt's voice came through the intercom with the measured warmth of someone who had been making this same announcement in various weather conditions for 19 years. "We are currently number 3 for departure from runway 4 left. Flight time to London Heathrow this evening will be approximately 6 hours and 50 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure." Diana secured the forward galley with the efficient authority of long practice. She checked the locking mechanisms twice, confirmed the jump seat harness, and settled in. Outside the terminal building slid slowly past the window as the tug pushed the Boeing 777 back from the gate. The rain was coming down steadily now, the runway lights blurring into long amber streaks against the wet tarmac. Inside the aircraft, passengers rustled and settled, the particular collective adjusting of a cabin preparing for hours in the air. In row 47, Imani did not adjust. She sat perfectly still, her book open in her lap, her eyes toward the window. In seat 2, Arthur Caldwell accepted a warm towel from Trevor Nash and allowed himself the particular satisfaction of a man who had been accidentally improved upon. He didn't think too hard about how the seat had become available. That was not his problem to think about. The tug disconnected. The pilots took control. The 777 began its slow, lumbering turn toward the taxiway. Diana, on her jump seat, allowed herself a long, quiet exhale. The kind of exhale that marks the end of something unpleasant and the beginning of something familiar and controlled. She had no idea. The brakes engaged without warning. The nose of the 777 pitched downward in a sudden, violent deceleration. In row 47, Imani's book slid forward off her lap. Around her, passengers jolted against their seatbelts with a collective gasp. Overhead bins rattled. A water bottle bounced to the floor 3 rows ahead. From her jump seat, Diana gripped the armrests. Her eyes snapped to the forward porthole window. What she saw made no immediate sense. An aircraft, a private jet, was sitting horizontally across the taxiway directly in front of the 777's nose. Not parked, not clearing. Positioned. Deliberately, precisely, immovably across the painted yellow center line, like a gate that someone had decided to construct in real time. It was matte black, slim, long, with the particular aerodynamic arrogance of a G700, the kind of aircraft that costs as much as a mid-tier real estate development and exists to communicate without words a specific category of power. Strobe lights pulsed from its wingtips in aggressive white flashes that scattered off the rain-slicked tarmac. Its Rolls-Royce engines were running. She could see the heat distortion off the nacelles, which meant whoever was in it had every intention of staying exactly where they were. Diana stared. Her brain ran through every plausible explanation and arrived at none. In the cockpit, Captain Holt was already on his radio. Kennedy ground Atlantic 407 heavy. We have an obstruction on taxiway Alpha. I repeat, we have a Gulfstream positioned across taxiway Alpha directly off our nose. What is happening? The controller came back strained. Atlantic 407, we see it on radar. Tail number November 77CGA. That aircraft departed the private apron without clearance and maneuvered into your path. We are demanding they move immediately. Holt exhaled through his nose. Well, give me that frequency. Standing. Ground to November 77CGA. You are blocking taxiway Alpha on an active runway complex. You are in violation of multiple federal aviation regulations. Move your aircraft immediately. A new voice entered the frequency. It was calm. Deeply, deliberately calm in the manner of someone who has already run the calculation and knows they hold every variable. Kennedy ground, this is November 77CGA. I hear your instruction. I am declining to comply. In the forward galley, Diana had picked up the interphone to ask the cockpit what was happening. She put it back down. She knew that voice. She didn't know why she knew it. But it hit somewhere between her shoulder blades like a weight being pressed down. Atlantic 407. The calm voice continued. This is Marcus Carter. I am the owner of this aircraft and the chairman of Carter Global Aviation. I believe you are already familiar with that name, Captain, because it appears on the operational lease agreement for every wide-body aircraft in the Atlantic Premier Fleet, including the Boeing 777 you are currently piloting. In the cockpit, Captain Holt's first officer looked at him. Holt held up one hand. You are not departing for London tonight, Marcus Carter said. Not until your senior purser personally walks to row 47, addresses my daughter by name, and escorts her to the seat she paid for. Seat 2A. If Imani Carter is not at the forward door within 5 minutes, I will remain exactly where I am. Indefinitely. And my legal team, who are already on the phone with your CEO, will begin processing the early termination clauses on 14 of your current fleet leases. Silence on the frequency. The kind of silence that is not empty but full of calculations and consequences, and the specific sound of a situation that has entirely changed shape. I'll give you 4 minutes and 45 seconds now, Carter said pleasantly. The clock is running. I suggest you get moving. Captain Warren Holt was 51 years old. He had flown through 3 emergency diversions, 2 bird strikes, and 1 complete hydraulic failure that he still didn't talk about at dinner. He was not a man who panicked. But he was also not a man who confused composure with control. And right now the control had left the building. He pressed the transmit button again. Mr. Carter, this is Captain Holt. I have over 300 passengers aboard this aircraft. I need to understand precisely what you are alleging has occurred. I'm not alleging anything, Marcus Carter said. I'm describing what happened. My daughter boarded your aircraft tonight as a full-fare, confirmed first-class passenger in seat 2A. Your senior purser. A woman named Diana Wolf stopped her at the door, questioned the validity of her ticket, watched the verification tablet confirm the booking as green and valid, and then manufactured a false reason to redirect her to economy. She then gave my daughter's seat to a different passenger who boarded after her. I have the digital manifest confirmation. I have my daughter's account, and I have the timestamp on the boarding records, which I can pull from your system right now if you would like, because that aircraft you are flying is part of my portfolio. Holt put his hand over the microphone and said to his first officer, "Get me Diana, now. I want to be very clear about something." Marcus continued as though Holt had not spoken. "This is not a negotiation. This is not a complaint I am going to file politely with your customer service department in exchange for a travel voucher. What your flight attendant did to my daughter tonight is something I am going to address completely and immediately. 4 minutes and 10 seconds. Holt released the mic, picked up the cabin interphone. "Diana, this is Holt. I need you at the galley phone right now." 3 seconds of silence. "Yes, Captain. We have a situation. The Gulfstream blocking taxiway Alpha belongs to a man named Marcus Carter of Carter Global Aviation. He is claiming that your actions during boarding tonight involved a passenger named Imani Carter, his daughter being wrongfully removed from seat 2A. Tell me what happened." "Exactly." A longer silence. Holt waited. There was a discrepancy in the booking, Diana said. Her voice was controlled, but something in the texture of it had changed. The confident sonority had developed a hairline fracture. "The scan came back green, but I had reason to believe." "The scan came back green," Holt repeated. He said it slowly, letting each word sit. "The tablet confirmed the booking. Is that correct?" Yes, but..." "And you redirected the passenger to economy regardless. I made a judgment call based on Diana." His voice cut through everything else. "Do you know who Marcus Carter is?" The silence this time was different. The silence of someone who was beginning to understand the precise size of the thing they were standing under. "Go to row 47, Holt said. "Bring her to the forward door. And Diana," he paused, choosing words with the care of a man diffusing something. "Choose your words down that aisle, very, very carefully." Before she could move, Diana crossed to the small porthole window in the forward galley and pressed her face against the glass. The Gulfstream's tail number was lit by the aircraft's own navigation lights, and by the floodlights of the 2 Port Authority vehicles that had materialized on the taxiway perimeter. She could read it clearly despite the rain. N77CGA, Carter Global Aviation. Diana stood very still. The galley hummed around her, the refrigeration units cycling the hydraulics, settling the distant murmur of 300 passengers wondering what was happening. Trevor Nash appeared in the galley doorway and looked at her face and immediately looked away again. She thought about the moment she had decided to give the seat to Arthur Caldwell. She tried to find the logic in it, the policy, the procedure, the defensible professional rationale. There wasn't one. She had never needed one before. In 22 years, the people she redirected had complained to gate agents and customer service lines and sympathetic friends on the other end of phone calls. None of them had ever redirected a Gulfstream. She thought about the tablet going green. She thought about the look on the girl's face, not anger, not tears, just that quiet, absolute, terrible calm that Diana had found more unsettling than any outburst could have been. She thought about the word the girl had used when Diana had said it was a booking error. "That is a lie," said clearly, without heat, as a factual correction. Diana Wolf had been told she was wrong in her 22 years of flying. She had been complained about. She had been disagreed with. She had never until that moment been told she was lying and felt the particular helplessness of knowing it was precisely true. The interphone chimed. She picked it up. It was Captain Holt. "Diana," he said. "Row 47. Now." She set the receiver down. She straightened her jacket, adjusted her pearl strand, and then stopped. Stood completely still for one more second, because she understood with sudden, sharp clarity that whatever she was adjusting and straightening for it was already over. Then she turned and began walking. In 22 years, Diana Wolf had walked this aisle thousands of times. She had pushed the cart through it, carried silver trays along it, moved through it with the fluid authority of a woman in absolute command of her environment. She knew every section by the change in carpet pattern, every lighting zone by the quality of the shadows. Tonight, the aisle felt like something else entirely. The passengers in first class, her first class, noticed her expression immediately. She could feel it. The slight turn of heads, the instinctive reading of a flight attendant's body language that experienced flyers develop without realizing it. She looked like someone walking toward something she could not outrun, and they could tell. Arthur Caldwell looked up from seat 2A as she passed. He'd finished his champagne. He was going to ask for another. He saw her face and decided against it. She pushed through the curtain into premium economy. Here, more passengers were aware that something unusual was happening outside phones pressed to windows. Flight tracker apps opened the words, "Private jet blocking the runway," already forming in typed queries. A man in row 12 turned to ask her about the delay. She walked past him without slowing. Jake Torres in seat 14C had already pivoted his camera away from the window and toward the aisle. He didn't stop Diana. He didn't call out. He just kept recording, moving in his seat to maintain the angle as she passed. The main cabin curtain, through it. The air in economy was thicker. The sounds were different. A baby somewhere in the middle rows, the low bass of headphones turned too high the particular acoustic density of a fully loaded aircraft. Diana walked down the aisle with her hands loose at her sides. She did not reach out to touch the headrests for steadiness, even though she wanted to. Row 42, row 43. Rosa Medina in her seat looked up. She tracked Diana with her eyes. Her expression did not soften. Row 44, row 45. Diana could see the cream-colored sweatshirt now. Imani Carter was exactly where Diana had sent her, wedged into 47E. The man on her left, still asleep with his shoulder trespassing into her space. The woman on her right, quiet with her toddler now dozing against her arm. Imani had her book open. Her noise-canceling headphones were around her neck, not over her ears. Diana had a fraction of a second to observe before Imani looked up. Their eyes met, and Diana, for the first time in 22 years, flinched. Diana stopped at the end of the row. She was aware that the passengers in 46, 47, and 48 had all gone quiet. The sleeping man had not woken. But Rosa Medina across the aisle had set her magazine down. Jake Torres's camera 3 rows back was pointing this direction. Diana cleared her throat. "Ms. Carter," she said. Her voice was working at about 60% of its normal authority. "There has been a development, and the captain has requested." Imani held up one hand. It was a small gesture. A brief, clean interruption. "Say my name correctly," Imani said. Diana blinked. Ms. Carter." "My first name," Imani said. "You called me sweetheart at the door. You called me young lady when you threatened me. You haven't used my actual name once. If you're about to ask me to do something, use my name." The woman with the toddler had stopped pretending not to listen. She was now openly watching. "Imani," Diana said. The word felt strange in her mouth. Foreign. the name of someone she had refused to see as a person until the person became an inconvenience too large to ignore. Ms. Imani Carter, the captain has requested your presence at the forward door. Imani didn't move. Why, she asked. Because there has been a situation outside the aircraft. Diana heard herself using the passive construction. There has been a situation as though events were happening to her rather than because of her, and hated it and could not stop it. There is a private aircraft blocking the taxiway. And the pilot, my father, Imani said. Yes. Diana's jaw tightened. Your father has requested? Has requested? Imani said. Or has required. Diana met her eyes. Required? Imani looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, And what exactly has he required that you be brought to the forward door? Diana said. That I bring you. Personally. Silence. The man in the aisle seat had woken up. He was blinking disoriented and then rapidly orienting himself to the tableau in front of him. So let me understand this, Imani said. She closed her book carefully, set it on top of her bag. Her voice was entirely steady. You stopped me at the door of this aircraft. You questioned the validity of my ticket despite watching your own tablet confirm it. You told me my confirmed paid first-class booking was a system error, which was not true. You threatened to have airport security arrest me if I continued to state basic facts. And then you gave my seat to a man who boarded after me. She paused. Is that an accurate summary of what happened? Diana said nothing. I'll take that as a yes, Imani said. And now because my father's aircraft is on your taxiway, you have walked the full length of this plane to ask me to come to the front. Is that right? Yes, Diana said. Did the captain send you specifically? Yes. Not Trevor. Not another attendant. You. Yes. Imani tilted her head slightly. Her expression had not shifted the entire time. The calm was not forced. It was not the calm of someone suppressing anger. It was something older and more disciplined, the calm of someone who had decided a long time ago that she would never perform her own diminishment for an audience. Tell me something, Imani said. When you stopped me at the door tonight, when you decided before I said a single word, before you checked anything that I was going to the back of this plane, what was it that told you I didn't belong in 2A? Diana's mouth opened. What was it? Imani pressed gently. Not accusingly, with the particular patience of someone who knows they won't get an honest answer and is asking anyway because the asking is itself the point. Was it my age? My clothes? She paused. The way I look. The woman with the toddler made a sound, barely a sound, just a small exhale of recognition. Diana said I made an error in judgment. That's not what I asked you. You made an assumption, Imani said. You looked at me, and you decided before I held up my ticket, before I said a single word, before you ran a single check, that I was not the kind of person who belongs in first class. And then you used your authority to enforce that assumption, even after every piece of evidence told you it was wrong. She stood up from the seat. She did it without rushing in a single smooth motion, and suddenly she was standing in the narrow aisle with the full weight of her composure filling the space. That's not a judgment error, Diana. That's a choice. Diana could not speak. All right, Imani said quietly. Let's go. As Imani moved to step into the aisle, the man in 47D, having been woken by none of his own choosing, and now finding himself at ringside for something he was only partially understanding, scrambled to his feet to let her out. He nearly knocked over the tray table. Sorry, he said to Imani specifically, like an instinct. Rosa Medina stood up. Not fully, she rose about halfway from her seat, her hand resting on the headrest in front of her, and she spoke across the aisle. I saw what happened at the front of the plane, she said. She was looking at Diana. I was right behind her at the boarding door. She had a valid pass. You confirmed it yourself, and then you moved her back here. Diana did not look at Rosa. I'm filing a report when we land. Rosa continued, her voice level. With my name on it. I want you to know that. From 3 rows back, Jake Torres spoke without looking up from his camera. He was still filming. I have the full timeline documented, he said. The exchange at the door. The seat reassignment. This conversation. He paused. I have about 12,000 followers online who are going to find this very relevant to their travel decisions. Diana felt the words hit like small flat stones. Around them, the passengers who had been quietly processing what they'd witnessed were no longer quiet. A woman in row 43 had her phone out screen unlocked. The man who'd been asleep in 46D was sitting up straight, jaw tight, looking at Diana with an expression she had never been on the receiving end of. A teenager in the window seat of 48 was watching Imani with unguarded awe. None of them needed to say anything. The collective attention was its own kind of statement. Imani zipped up her bag and hoisted it over one shoulder. She looked at Rosa. Thank you, she said simply. Rosa nodded. She sat back down. She had said what needed to be said. Imani turned and began walking forward. Diana followed. This walk was different. Imani moved through the economy cabin at an easy pace. Not rushed, not triumphant in any theatrical sense, just steady and purposeful. And the cabin responded. Heads turned not with judgment, but with something that takes a moment to name correctly: recognition. The recognition of someone who has been in an unjust position and is leaving it with their dignity intact. A woman in row 39 started to clap. Just once. A single sharp clap, instinctive like a punctuation mark. Then 2 people in row 36. Then a scattering of applause that moved through the main cabin like something organic, neither choreographed nor overwhelming, just real. The sound of 300 people quietly deciding whose side they were on. Imani didn't perform for it. She didn't smile or wave or slow down. She simply walked. Diana followed 3 paces behind. Her chignon was still immaculate. Her uniform was still pressed, but her posture had undergone a fundamental revision. The rigid authority that had been as much a part of her appearance as the pearl strand and the burgundy lipstick was simply gone. Not hidden, not suppressed, but absent, like a signal that had been cut at the source. They passed through the main cabin curtain. They moved through premium economy, where Jake Torres lowered his camera for the first time and met Imani's eyes with a nod that meant, I got it. All of it. They passed through the first-class curtain, and Arthur Caldwell, who had been refilling his own champagne with the bottle that Trevor had left within reach because the service had been entirely absent for the last 20 minutes, looked up. He saw the young woman in the cream sweatshirt walking back through his section with the unhurried confidence of someone returning to something that had always been hers. He saw the flight attendant trailing behind her. He set down the champagne. Captain Warren Holt was standing at the forward galley when Imani arrived. He was a tall man with a graying beard and the particular posture of someone who had spent 3 decades navigating authority with care. He looked at Imani with an expression that was trying to be professionally diplomatic and kept slipping into something more honest, something that looked around the edges like shame. Ms. Carter, he said. I am Captain Holt. I am profoundly sorry for what occurred during your boarding process tonight. It was wrong, it was unjust, and it was not consistent with Atlantic Premier's policies or my expectations of my crew. Imani looked at him steadily. Thank you, she said. She meant it, but did not elaborate. Before I put you on with your father, Holt continued, there is a matter in the cabin that needs addressing. He turned and gestured to Trevor Nash, who appeared immediately. Please ask Mr. Caldwell to come to the forward galley. 30 seconds later, Arthur Caldwell appeared through the first-class curtain. He was carrying a champagne flute out of what seemed to be pure muscle memory, and then seemed to realize he was carrying it and looked briefly embarrassed. He looked at Imani. He looked at the captain. He looked at Diana standing very quietly by the galley counter. "Mr. Caldwell," Captain Holt said, "I need to explain what has occurred tonight." Holt did so, briefly, clinically, and without softening any of it. The booking, the verification, the reassignment, the man on the taxiway, the leasing company. Arthur Caldwell's face moved through several phases during this explanation, the most significant of which was the moment he understood that the seat he'd been sitting in was never actually empty. "I wasn't aware," Caldwell said. "I was told it was an upgrade." "I understand that," Holt said. "I am not holding you responsible for what Diana decided, but I am asking you to return to your original booking in premium economy. Your boarding pass, which you still have, will have you in 17B. Caldwell looked at the champagne flute in his hand. He looked at Imani. "I'm sorry," he said. Genuinely, it seemed. Not the reflex apology of a man managing a situation, but the slightly stunned apology of someone confronting the gap between what they assumed and what was true. "I should have said something when I heard you at the door. I should have said something then." "Yes," Imani said. "You should have." Caldwell held her gaze for a second, then nodded. He set the champagne flute on the galley counter, picked up his briefcase from where Trevor had retrieved it from 2A, and walked back through the curtain toward premium economy without another word. The champagne remained on the counter. No one moved to pour it out or pick it up. It sat there flat and abandoned and somehow more eloquent than anything else in the scene. Captain Holt turned to the galley phone and lifted the receiver. "Mr. Carter," he said. "We're ready for you." Marcus Carter's voice came through the aviation headset that Holt placed over Imani's ears, and this time, stripped of the formal radio brevity, it was her father. Not the corporate voice, not the controlled, pressure voice he used across negotiating tables. Just Marcus. "Hey, you okay?" "I'm good," Imani said. She leaned against the galley counter and looked out the small porthole at the rain. "I'm good, Dad. Did she bring you up herself?" "Yes. Did she treat you with respect?" Imani considered the word. "She's scared," she said. "It's different." A pause. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Okay, then give the headset to the captain." Imani handed it over. Holt pressed the receiver to his ear. "Captain Marcus said," and the warmth was gone. "Not hostile, precise. My daughter is safe and at the forward door." "I appreciate that. Now we need to deal with the second matter." Holt straightened slightly. "Yes, sir. I want Diana Wolf off this aircraft before it moves an inch toward London." Holt closed his eyes briefly. "Mr. Carter, I understand your position absolutely, but removing my senior purser on an active taxiway creates an FAA crew minimum issue. We would need to return to the gate and wait for a reserve flight attendant, which means—" "Then go back to the gate and wait," Marcus said. "Or source a reserve through the terminal. I don't care which you choose, Captain, but that woman used her position to publicly humiliate my daughter based on nothing but bias. She invented a policy violation. She threatened her with airport security, and she gave her seat to someone else. I am not going to fly my daughter off in my aircraft and leave Diana Wolf to serve champagne to London. I'll need at minimum 20 minutes to—" "You have more than that," Marcus said. "My Gulfstream is comfortable. I can wait. And while we wait, my legal team will continue their conversation with your CEO. So taking the time to do this correctly is in everyone's interest." Holt lowered the headset. He looked at Diana. Diana had been standing by the galley counter the entire time. She had not moved. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was composed in the manner of someone whose face is composing itself as an act of sheer will. while everything underneath has given way completely. Diana Holt said. I need you to get your bag. Diana said. Captain, please. Her voice broke on the second word. Not dramatically, a hairline fracture barely audible but real. I have 22 years with this airline, she said. My pension. What you did tonight isn't something I can protect you from. Holt said. His voice was not unkind. It was simply without room. You made a choice, Diana, and the consequence of that choice is this conversation. He picked up the cabin phone. Ground crew, this is Atlantic 407. We need the air stairs reconnected to the forward L1 door. We have a crew change. And then he reached for the reserve dispatch line. Diana did not move for a long moment. Then she reached under the galley counter for her bag. The air stairs connected to the L1 door with a mechanical shutter that ran through the galley floor. The forward door swung open and the rain blew in cold and immediate and indifferent. The lights from the two Port Authority vehicles on the taxiway perimeter cut through the downpour in sweeping yellow arcs. Imani stood in the galley doorway back against the wall, watching. Diana Wolf picked up her rolling carry-on bag, the one she brought to every flight with the particular items that made a transatlantic trip manageable items she had packed and repacked hundreds of times with the confidence of someone who assumed they would always need them. She pulled up the handle. The sound of the wheels on the galley floor was very loud in the small space. She stood at the threshold of the door for a moment. Rain blew against her face. Her chignon, which had held perfectly for 14 hours of pre-flight preparation, had developed a small asymmetrical loosening at the nape of her neck, the first visible evidence of a person coming apart at the edges. She looked at Imani. Imani met her eyes. For a moment, the two women simply looked at each other. The senior purser, with 22 years of authority and a rolling bag and nowhere to go. And the 22-year-old woman in the cream sweatshirt who had flown these kinds of planes since she was old enough to understand what her father did for a living. I want you to know, Imani said quietly. I didn't want this for you. I just wanted to sit in my seat. Diana looked at her for another second. Then she looked down. She said nothing. There was nothing left that would serve any purpose, no defense, no apology adequate to the scope of what had happened, no version of this moment that she could arrange into something survivable. She simply accepted the acknowledgement and stepped out the door. The metal stairs were slick. She gripped the railing with both hands. The rain soaked her uniform jacket in the 15 seconds it took to descend, darkening the navy to near black, turning the silk scarf at her collar into something limp and clinging. At the base of the stairs, a Port Authority officer waited with an umbrella he had not extended. Diana walked past him and into the rain. Behind her, the L1 door swung shut. She heard the bolts lock. She heard the faint rising pitch of the Gulfstream's engines beginning to spool up on the taxiway ahead, the sound of something departing, clearing the way, releasing the commercial jet that had been blocked for 27 minutes. She did not look up. She walked toward the terminal building in the rain, pulling her rolling bag behind her, the wheels stuttering over every crack in the wet tarmac. The sound followed her rattle, rattle, rattle until she was far enough from the aircraft that the engine noise swallowed everything else. The Gulfstream G700's interior existed in a different atmospheric category from anything on the taxiway behind them. The moment the door sealed and the aircraft began its smooth, unrushed taxi toward the private departure runway, the world outside became a matter of visual interest rather than weather to endure. The rain that had been a cold physical punishment at the base of those metal stairs was now simply a pattern on the oval windows, pretty even in the way that things become when you are protected from them. Imani sat in one of the cream leather club chairs and kicked her wet sneakers off before she'd fully settled. She tucked her legs under her and pulled a wool blanket from the seat pocket. The cabin was quiet except for the hum of the engines and the specific quality of pressurized air that she had grown up with. It smelled like cedar and something neutral and expensive. It smelled like her father's world. Marcus Carter came through from the back cabin where he'd been on a call. He was in a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, the jacket abandoned hours ago. He looked, as he always did in working mode, like a man who had simply decided to win whatever was in front of him and was in the process of doing exactly that. He sat in the chair across from her and looked at her face for a long moment before he said anything. Then, "You didn't cry." Imani looked at him. "I never cry in front of them." He nodded. "I know. I'm just noting it." She pulled the blanket tighter. "It was embarrassing," she said. "The walk to the back, the people watching." She paused. "And I was angry. I want to be honest about that. I sat in that seat and I was angry in a way that I had to work to not show." "What did you do with it?" She looked at the rain on the window. "I opened a book." Marcus smiled. Just barely. The particular smile of someone who has taught something that held. "I thought about what you used to say," Imani continued. "About building something. About not performing your own humiliation." He was quiet for a moment. "You were 8 years old the first time you told me something was unfair," he said. "On that flight to Atlanta. You said the man had been mean to the flight attendant and you asked me why people did that. I remember." "I didn't tell you the whole answer that day," Marcus said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at her with the directness he only turned on for conversations that mattered. "The full answer is because systems allow it. Because when there's no consequence, behavior calcifies. What that woman did to you tonight wasn't random cruelty. It was the product of 22 years of an institution allowing her to make those calls with no accountability." Imani nodded slowly. "Dad," she said, "did you have to block the whole runway?" He looked at her with great patience. "Yes." She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. "It was very dramatic." "It needed to be dramatic," he said simply. "A phone call to customer service would have gotten you a travel voucher, and Diana Wolf a written warning that was forgotten in 6 months. What happened tonight happened in front of witnesses, on a live frequency, with footage, and it will be processed and reviewed and documented at every level of that company because the inconvenience was large enough that they could not contain it." He sat back. "Your dignity is not a customer service issue. It is a line I will never let anyone blur quietly." Imani was quiet for a moment. Then she looked scared at the end. "Diana," when she was walking off. "I know. I told her I hadn't wanted that for her, that I just wanted to sit in my seat." Marcus looked at her for a long time. He looked at her the way parents look at their children when those children become something recognizable as their best selves. Not without pain, but with a very particular quality of pride that words don't quite reach. "I know," he said again. "That is exactly the right thing to have said." The Gulfstream cleared the private departure runway boundary and lifted smoothly into the rain, the landing gear retracting in the quiet thump she'd known since childhood. Below them, JFK's runway lights became a grid of amber and white, and then the cloud base swallowed everything, and there was only the clear dark above. Imani let the blanket fall loose around her shoulders. She picked up her book from where she'd tucked it into the seat pocket. She opened it. This time she actually intended to read it. Marcus picked up his tablet. But before he turned back to his work, he said quietly, without looking up, "You did everything right tonight, Imani." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The meeting in the Atlantic Premier Executive Suite in Chicago began at 7:15 in the morning, 4 hours after Flight 407 had finally departed for London. Heathrow delayed by 1 hour and 43 minutes and 11 minutes after the board chairman's assistant delivered the Sullivan Aviation legal brief to the conference room table. CEO Paul Raymond sat at the head of the table, pressing 2 fingers against his left temple. He was 61 years old and had been in commercial aviation for 37 of those years, and he had never opened a morning meeting with the particular document that was currently spread before him. He looked at his VP of in-flight services, a woman named Carol Brent, who was sitting very still and looking at her hands. "Walk me through it," he said. Carol walked him through it. The boarding sequence, the tablet verification, the seat reassignment, the text message exchange, the Gulfstream on the taxiway, the radio frequency, the second condition, the stairway. Diana Wolf in the rain. Paul Raymond listened without speaking. When Carol finished, the room was very quiet. Then he said, "How many planes do we currently lease from Carter Global Aviation?" 31 wide-body aircraft, said the VP of Finance from the far end of the table, including 14 of our transatlantic configured 777s. The early termination clauses in those contracts, if activated, "I know what the clauses say," Paul said. "I signed them." He picked up the legal brief again. Carter's general counsel was requesting 4 things: a formal public statement of accountability issued by end of business today, permanent termination of Baylor, he corrected himself, Diana Wolf, a full independent audit of in-flight staff bias training across all Atlantic premier routes, and a direct written apology to Imani Carter from Paul Raymond himself, not from the communications team, not a form letter, not a voucher. From him. By name. If all 4 conditions are met within 30 days, Carter Global Aviation will maintain its current lease arrangement. If any condition is unmet or performative rather than substantive, they begin calling in early termination clauses starting with the transatlantic fleet. "We can't fly our international routes with 13 planes," Carol said quietly. "We can't fly them at all if the story that's already running on every aviation news outlet this morning costs us the public confidence to fill seats," Paul answered. He set the brief down. He looked around the table. "This is not a PR situation to be managed. It is a situation that happened that we allowed to happen through 22 years of institutional tolerance for this kind of behavior, and the only response that is going to prevent this from consuming the company is a genuine one." He paused. "Get me Diana Wolf's file. Get me the audit company. Get me the communications team for the statement draft. And someone get me a clean sheet of paper." "What for?" asked the general counsel. Paul Raymond looked at him. "I'm going to write a letter to a 22-year-old woman," he said, "and I'm going to do it by hand because I think she's earned that much." The HR office at JFK's Terminal 4 operations level was a windowless room that smelled of stale recycled air and burned coffee. It had a drop-ceiling fluorescent lighting and a faux wood desk that had never been replaced since the terminal renovation 12 years prior. It was not a room designed for anything important, and yet important things happened in it daily, because important things, the kind that restructure lives permanently, often happen in rooms that look like they were built to discourage it. Diana Wolf sat across the desk from Sandra Price, Atlantic Premier's regional base HR director. Sandra was 53, white with close-cropped hair and the particular economy of expression that comes from spending a career delivering news that other people did not want to receive. She was not unkind. She was simply not there to soften anything. To Diana's left sat her union representative, a man named Glenn Herrick, who had the posture of someone who already knew how this would end and was present mainly to ensure the paperwork was in order. Diana looked like a person who had been through weather. Her uniform was dry now she'd been in the terminal hotel for several hours, but it carried the memory of the rain in small wrinkles that hadn't pressed out. Her hair was down, which Diana Wolf's hair had not been in a professional setting in 11 years. Without the chignon, without the burgundy lipstick, without the pearl strand that was currently in her bag, she looked not smaller exactly, but unarmored, like someone standing without a shield she had carried so long, she'd forgotten it was optional. Sandra opened the folder on the desk. Diana, she said, we have reviewed Captain Holt's incident report, the digital passenger manifest time-stamped records, the testimony of 4 first-class and 9 economy section passengers, and the recorded radio communications between Carter Global Aviation and the Atlantic Premier flight crew. She looked up briefly. The evidence is definitive. Your tablet confirmed Ms. Carter's booking as valid. You proceeded to redirect her to economy regardless. You provided a false explanation to a paying passenger, threatened her with airport security without cause, and facilitated the illegal reassignment of her confirmed seat. I've been with this airline for 22 years, Diana said. It was the 3rd time she had said it in the last hour, and she was beginning to understand from the way people's faces didn't change when she said it, that 22 years was not the argument she believed it was. I'm aware of your tenure, Sandra said, and your service record, which is strong, has been noted. But this incident falls under Section 14 of your employment contract, the Conduct and Anti-Discrimination Clause. The behavior documented constitutes a direct and material violation. Diana said, I made a judgment call. I misread the situation. Is 22 years of service worth nothing against one bad call? Sandra looked at her with the steady eyes of someone who had been asked this question in various forms for decades. A judgment call made without evidence, she said, when the evidence was already green on your own tablet, is not a misread situation, Diana. It's a choice, and the consequences of that choice extend beyond your employment record. They extend to the passenger, to the airline's contractual relationship with its largest leasing partner, and to every flight crew member who operates under training protocols your conduct has now placed under federal audit review. She placed a document on the desk and slid it forward. Atlantic Premier Airlines is terminating your employment effective immediately, Sandra said, for cause. This classification forfeits your standard severance package. Your accumulated pension benefits are frozen pending a union review that, based on the cause classification, is unlikely to unlock them prior to your contractual retirement window. Diana stared at the paper. Glenn Herrick said very quietly, I have to be honest with you, Diana. The union reviewed the manifest records last night. There's nothing we can do here. You will surrender your flight credentials, your company-issued tablet, and your identification before leaving this office. Sandra continued, you are permanently restricted from operating as a flight crew member on any Atlantic Premier route effective immediately. Your name has been shared with our global partner network as part of the incident documentation. The room was very still. You will also receive, Sandra said, a personal letter from CEO Paul Raymond, which will be sent to your home address within 10 days. Diana looked up at that. That was not what she had expected. Sandra held her gaze. It is not a conciliation, she said. It is an accounting. Diana looked down at the termination papers again. The black type on the page was very clear and very permanent. She had spent 22 years in a world of altitude and motion and the particular borrowed authority of a uniform, and now the floor was absolutely still beneath her feet, and the room was absolutely small around her, and there was nowhere to go but out. She picked up the pen. She signed her name. She had excellent penmanship. She always had. The story broke on 2 aviation news platforms and a major travel publication within 18 hours of Flight 407's delayed departure. By the following evening, it had been picked up by 4 national outlets and was trending on social media under a phrase that Jake Torres had used in his post, uploading the footage he'd taken, not sensationalized, just documented with timestamps. The lady just walked past with her head down. The whole plane was quiet. The footage reached 11 million views before Atlantic Premier's communications team issued their statement. The statement was not crafted by committee in the way that corporate statements typically are. Paul Raymond had written the first draft himself on a legal pad and handed it to his communications director with the words, "Do not smooth this." He had not said please. It read in part, "Atlantic Premier Airlines failed a passenger. We failed her before she reached her seat. We failed her when our crew member chose bias over evidence. And we failed her in every year of institutional culture that allowed that choice to feel permissible. We are not issuing this statement in response to public pressure or to protect a business relationship. We are issuing it because Imani Carter deserved to sit in the seat she paid for, and our airline did not give her that. We are sorry. And we are going to do something substantive about it." The handwritten letter to Imani Carter arrived 10 days later, as promised. She read it on the Gulfstream on a short flight to Atlanta. She read it twice, folded it along its original creases, and put it in the inside pocket of her leather weekend bag. She did not post it. It wasn't for public consumption. It was just what it was, an acknowledgement from a man who had run something imperfectly and was choosing in the window he had left to be honest about it. 3 months after the night on taxiway Alpha, Imani Carter, using a portion of her personal trust fund and a matching grant from Carter Global Aviation's community arm, established a foundation. She named it Open Cabin. Its purpose was specific and unglamorous: to fund legal advocacy for passengers who had experienced discriminatory treatment in commercial aviation, and to develop and provide free bias training resources to regional carriers that could not afford third-party consultants. She did not hold a press conference. She filed the nonprofit registration, built a simple website, and hired a director with 20 years of civil rights legal experience. Then she went back to the last semester of her graduate program at LSE, which she had been attending in London, and which was, after all, why she had been on Flight 407 in the first place. Marcus Carter contributed to the Foundation's operational fund but did not attach his name to it publicly. That was Imani's decision, and he respected it without needing to be asked. Rosa Medina filed a detailed witness account with Atlantic Premier's audit team within 48 hours of the incident. Her statement was specific, time-stamped from memory, and clear. She was thanked in writing by the audit's lead investigator, who told her off the record that her account was among the most useful of the 37 passenger statements collected. Jake Torres published a full written account alongside the video footage. He was careful. He included the full context, the boarding timeline, Diana's words and actions in economy, Imani's responses, and the sound barely audible at the back of his footage of the applause that had moved through the main cabin when Imani walked forward. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. Atlantic Premier completed the mandatory audit within 60 days. The findings were not comfortable. They documented a pattern of informal discretionary practices across multiple crew members on international routes. Practices that had never been formally prohibited because no one had formally required that they be. 47 crew members were placed in mandatory retraining. 3 were placed on performance review. 2 resigned. The audit report was submitted to the FAA and made partially public at Marcus Carter's insistence as a condition of the ongoing lease arrangement. Diana Wolf was not mentioned by name in the public version of the report. She did not need to be. Everyone who mattered in that industry already knew. Winter in the outer terminals of Newark Liberty International Airport is a specific category of cold. It is not the clean, dramatic cold of open spaces. It is the cold of wind tunnels, the drafts that move between aircraft, between jetways, between the indifferent walls of buildings that were built for function and not for warmth. It smells of aviation fuel and industrial deicing fluid and the damp specific to concrete that never quite dries. Diana Wolf stood on the tarmac apron of a regional carrier's operation gate in a high-visibility orange safety vest worn over a company jacket that had never been tailored because it was not that kind of company. Her hair was down and pulled back in a simple elastic. She wore insulated gloves. Her job was ground crew coordination. She assisted with baggage loading, communicated gate status between the ground team and the crew, and handled the logging of cargo weight for the carrier's smaller regional aircraft. She had taken the position 6 weeks after her termination. It was not as she had once thought beneath her. It was simply what was available to someone whose aviation credentials had been revoked, whose 22-year career had been crystallized into a cause-related termination on every professional record she possessed. She was good at the logistics. She had always been organized. The cargo logs were accurate, the gate communications clear. Her supervisor had noted at her 30-day review that she was reliable and did not complain. She did not complain. She worked the shift. She logged the weights. She stood in the cold. On a Tuesday afternoon in February, a Gulfstream G70 in matte black with silver accents made its approach to the private terminal at the far end of the airport. She didn't see it land. She was inside processing a late manifest. But she heard it, the particular signature of those Rolls-Royce engines that she would have recognized anywhere, and she went still at her desk for a moment. Then she finished the manifest. She clocked out at the end of her shift. She drove home. She was not sure at this distance how much of what she felt was remorse and how much was simply the particular loneliness of a person who had derived their entire sense of identity from a position and was now constructing a self from the materials that remained. It was slow work. It was honest work, in the way that all slow things have an honesty that speed does not. She thought sometimes about the girl in the cream sweatshirt, not about the Gulfstream, not about Marcus Carter, not about the rain or the stairs or Sandra Price's precise eyes delivering the termination. She thought about the moment in row 47 when the girl had asked her, "What was it that told you I didn't belong?" And she had not answered. She had not answered because there was no answer that she could say out loud, and remain the person she had believed herself to be. And she had spent 6 months quietly, privately, without witnesses, sitting with the truth that had been in the question. The truth that the answer was nothing. Nothing that was real. Nothing that held up. Nothing that had ever been anything except a mirror of assumptions she had absorbed and amplified and weaponized against a stranger with a valid ticket for 22 years and never once been asked to name. She named it now, in the cold in the small hours on the drive home. She named it because naming things is where repair begins, even when repair arrives too late to change the consequence, even when the naming is only for yourself in a car in the dark heading home. It was a beginning of something. She did not know yet what. I want to talk to you directly for a moment. I've been telling stories on this channel for a while now. Stories about dignity, about what happens when someone decides based on nothing real that another person belongs in a lesser place. And I read the comments. I read every single city that you drop below these videos. I see the people who type "this happened to me" and then stop, because one sentence is already enough to hold the weight of the memory. This story stayed with me. Not because of the Gulfstream, although let's be honest, that part is extraordinary. But because of the moment in row 47 before any of the reversal happened when Imani Carter sat down in a middle seat that was never supposed to be hers, opened a book she wasn't going to read, and decided not to perform her humiliation for the people who were watching. That decision, quiet, private, witnessed by almost no one, is the one that tells you everything about who she is. We spend a lot of time in stories like this celebrating the reversal. The villain gets what's coming. The power shifts. The private jet blocks the runway, and everyone who was watching with their hands tied suddenly has somewhere to point. Those moments matter. Justice should be visible. Consequences should be real. But the part I keep returning to is the part before the reversal. The moment when Imani had no guarantee of anything. When she had her father's text, "Put your seatbelt on," but no knowledge of what that meant. When she was just a 22-year-old woman sitting in a middle seat near the lavatory in a plane she had every right to be on, keeping herself whole through sheer discipline. That kind of discipline does not come from nowhere. It is built. It is taught sometimes by a parent, sometimes by experience, sometimes by the accumulation of 100 smaller moments that taught you your dignity is yours to keep, regardless of what someone else decides to do with it. I think about the young people who will watch this story. The ones who are in their own row 47 right now, not on a plane, but somewhere, in a classroom, in an office, in a store, in a meeting, being told with words or body language or deliberate oversight that they don't quite belong in the space they've earned. You belong there. The evidence is green. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you have the power that Marcus Carter has the ability to make a consequence real and visible and impossible to manage, quietly use it. Not for revenge, for accountability. There is a meaningful difference, and Imani demonstrated it perfectly. I didn't want this for you. I just wanted to sit in my seat. There is something worth naming about how this story ends. It doesn't end with Diana Wolf destroyed. She is not in ruins. She is in a parking lot driving home naming something she should have named a long time ago. That is not a small thing. It is also not enough to undo the harm. Both of those facts are true simultaneously, and it's important to hold both of them. Stories like this are often told as morality plays. The villain falls, the hero rises, the system self-corrects. Everyone learns the lesson credits roll. Real accountability is more complicated and slower, and less satisfying at every edge. Diana Wolf will spend years in the aftermath of 30 seconds of unchecked assumption. That is real. That is the actual weight of what she did. And somewhere in her evening drives home, that weight is beginning to be reckoned with. Imani Carter did not set out to change an airline. She set out to fly to London for her graduate program. She wanted to sit in her seat, listen to music for 6 hours, and arrive rested. What she encountered instead was a 22-year pattern of institutional tolerance dressed up in a navy uniform and pearl jewelry, and she handled it with a composure that most people would struggle to maintain in a fraction of those circumstances. What open cabin the foundation she built represents is something I think about often. It is not an organization built on anger. It is built on the very practical observation that the most vulnerable people in situations like the one Imani experienced don't have a Gulfstream. They have a complaint form and a customer service phone number and the particular fatigue of someone who knows that the process is designed to absorb complaints rather than address them. Imani had resources. She used them in proportion not to punish, but to prevent. Not to make Diana's story the center, but to create infrastructure for the next person who doesn't have a father with a tail number. That is what justice looks like when it's operating at its best, not revenge, but prevention. Not destruction, but accountability with a purpose beyond the moment. Marcus Carter said it plainly to his daughter on that Gulfstream 30,000 feet over the Atlantic while she curled up under a cashmere blanket with a book she was finally actually reading. You cannot treat people like second-class citizens and expect the world to just keep spinning. He is correct. And the world in this story and in the ones happening right now in every terminal and cabin and gate where someone is being redirected based on nothing but another person's assumption is slowly, imperfectly, sometimes dramatically being asked to stop spinning that way. It will require people like Imani who stay whole when someone tries to diminish them. It will require people like Rosa and Jake who say I saw it and mean it and put their names on it. And it will require occasionally a matte black Gulfstream parked directly in the way of business as usual. If this story reached something in you, if you've been in Imani's seat literally or otherwise, or if you've been the person who saw what was happening and didn't say anything, in time I want to hear from you. Drop your city in the comments. Drop your story if you're willing to share it. Tell me the moment you decided to stay whole when someone was trying to make you feel small. Or tell me the moment you wish you'd spoken up sooner. Every comment in this space is worth something. Every voice here is part of why we keep telling these stories. If you believe that a boarding pass is a boarding pass, that a confirmed seat belongs to the person whose name is on it full stop, no conditions, then subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs it today. And remember what Imani said, standing in that aisle in her cream sweatshirt to a woman who finally had to face what she'd done. I didn't want this for you. I just wanted to sit in my seat. That's the whole lesson. That's all it ever was. See you in the next one.